I was playing at a friend's house in grade school. I went looking for the bathroom, but opened the door to the laundry room instead. My friend's mom was sitting on top of the dryer and completely freaked out when she saw me. It didn't occur to me until about 20 years later that she was probably masturbating. I had a childhood friend for about a year or so who lived just down the street from me. He was a pretty normal kid from what I can recall. I remember him getting really excited one day about an upcoming visit from his uncle. He told me about a game that he and his uncle would always play together called Toilet Tea. From what I remember him telling me, the game involved his uncle trying to finger dollar coins out of the kid's naked butt and the kid doing the same to the uncle. This was only ever played in the kid's tree fort and he was allowed to keep all the dollar coins when the game was over. Thank Christ no one was allowed to play except my friend and his uncle. I moved away a short time later and never saw the kid ever again. It wasn't until many years later that I remembered it and thought to myself, holy hell, that's super messed up. When we were 6 years old, one of the teachers at my primary school had a favorite kid in my class. He wasn't our teacher, but if he was on playground duty he would come out to the playground when we were there, find her, crouch down on the ground and tell her to sit on his knee. Then when she did he would stroke her hair and tell her what beautiful blonde hair she had. At the time the rest of us were kind of jealous of her because we thought it just meant she was important. She was kind of quiet, but from a fairly rich family I guess, and always had nice clothes and stationery, and this teacher would openly say she was his favorite, and ask us where she was if he couldn't find her. I remember walking around a corner or something and seeing them by themselves, with her on his knee as he talked to her softly. Years later I feel really quite disturbed by it. That poor kid. I found an unloaded, real, revolver in the street behind our apartment when I was about 5 years old. Put it with my other, toy, cowboy guns, that was a thing. Played with it, didn't like it much. The real gun was heavy, and too hard for me to pull the trigger. The plastic ones were much more fun. Eventually my mom found it and, in retrospective surprise, didn't freak out, just made it disappear. I was 8 and I was playing outside with some friends in my front yard. An old disabled guy came up to me with a goldfish in a bowl and asked me if I wanted a fish. He asked me to get in his car to look at other fish. I didn't feel comfortable and luckily my mom had come running from the house. I didn't realize till I was much older that I almost got kidnapped. Next door neighbor kid tried to drop a hammer on my head from a tree. It hit my shoulder, fortunately. I had no idea I was almost killed. The kid went to juvenile after trying to set our other neighbor's house on fire. When I was around 5 or 6 I was at Kmart with my mom. This was back in the 70s, so as my mom shopped, I would hang out by myself in the toy department. I especially loved the Simone game, where you press the buttons and try to match the pattern. So one day I was standing there at the display playing Simone, and an old man started talking to me. He talked to me for a few minutes, and then he told me to come with him. He took me by the hand and started walking toward the back of the store, where there were double doors that led out to the back parking lot. I remember wondering where we were going, but not being particularly concerned. As we were passing the last couple of aisles, I suddenly saw my mom at the end of the aisle. I kind of snapped out of it, realized that I should go to my mom rather than go with this guy. I pulled away from his hand and ran to my mom. I didn't say a word because I knew she had told me not to talk to strangers. Later on I realized that there were several unpleasant scenarios that I had been very lucky to escape. I was 7. Had to pee really bad, but my mom was in the bathroom. After waiting and knocking, and complaining, I just went in without waiting for a response. Found my mom sitting on the toilet and slumped over pale as hell. As calm as I can be I call my aunt over who freaks and calls ambulance. My mom was gone for over a couple of months. Family just told me she was traveling whenever I asked about her. Years later I learned I screwed up my mom's suicide attempt and she had been in a psych ward for months. My mom is still around, but she creates a lot of drama everywhere she goes. I've gone limited contact often to avoid it. I am 30 to give you all sense of time. My mom used to actively avoid my questions, so I stopped asking. Older cousin has learned from her folks that her psych time was long since she kept claiming she had nothing to live for. When I was around 9 I went snow sledding with family and friends. It was a popular sledding area with a few different hills and some woods. This older guy in his 40s had an awesome toboggan with a flashlight rigged up on the front. He was flying down hills 10 times faster than anyone. He was there by himself and it was getting dark out. He came up to me and started telling me about this secret hill in the woods that was huge. He told me I could use his sled. I followed him for about 2 minutes until I realized I couldn't see my family or friends anymore. I was maybe 20 feet into the woods before I was overcome with a horrible gut-wrenching feeling. I dropped my sled and ran like hell back toward my family. I remember hearing his footsteps behind me moving as quickly as I was. By the time I got to my family and told them, he had disappeared. I am 100% certain I would have been molested or murdered in those woods. Telling this story makes me feel the way I did when I was 20 feet into those woods, 21 years ago. Scary as hell. I was at a family reunion when I was really little and some long-distant uncle asked me to go help him chop wood. My mom intervened just before I got in his truck, and later on I realized I was probably about to get molested. I had never met him before and he left the reunion right after that. I had completely blocked this out, but there was my babysitter that always wanted to suck my toes and my sister's toes. It didn't seem creepy at that time, but I definitely didn't like it and would try to avoid her. When I was about 5, my family went to a new park to play baseball. It was in an area we hadn't been to. We lived in Denver but didn't typically stray too far, and I wasn't thrilled. Anyhow, after much pleading I got permission from my mom to go play up on the hill about 100 yards away. There was a huge swing set that was still within view of the field. They're engrossed in their game, arguing over who has to sit in the outfield, yada yada, and I'm just chilling on my swing, minding my own business, playing Never-Ending Story. Then a couple of girls that were young enough to not be scary, but old enough to be super cool, 12 maybe, showed up, start screwing around on the slide, then asked me what I'm doing. They ask about my life, talk nerdy 80s and early 90s movies with me, and ask what I like to do. I say dancing, and they say oh us too. Yeah, Mark loves watching us dance. In my naivete I say my dad loves coming to my dance recitals too. They giggle and tell me no, Mark is kind of like their substitute dad since neither of them have dads. He's a man that takes care of them because they don't have moms or dads and he wants to take care of them. They explain they aren't related, just friends that didn't have a home, so they live in the same home together, but Mark is great because he takes them to travel and meet other girls their age. Well, I like to travel, I say. Really? Come meet Mark, they say, we think you'd really like him. He's nice to us, he would love to have a friend that's younger to spoil. He gives them lots of presents they say, especially when they have fun with his friends. I want to, Mark sounds like a cool dude, they're really nice girls, non-threatening. Never talk to strange adults, right? But these girls aren't adults and they vouch for Mark. However, that morning, the discovery of Allie Barrels' body had been in the local paper. My mom, typically a free-range parent, had been loath to let me stray from her side that morning, so reluctantly, I tell them, nope. I'm going to go see what my family is doing, and I run down the hill before they can protest. I didn't have any reservations about hanging out with them, I just knew if I disappeared my mom would be angry. I told my mom, she blew it off as a funny story, and I mostly forgot about it. It wasn't until this past year, when I did training on investigations into human trafficking, that I remembered those girls. I hope they were either 100% full of it or turned out alright. I grew up in a pretty small and quiet town. When I was 8 or 9 I was riding my bike around the block while my mom and her friend visited. About 3 houses down from mine was a great big house that had been turned into a few apartments. One of the residents was a disabled man, and as I made another lap around I saw him staggering through the front lawn of that building muttering, and his whole body was wet and shiny with something red. I remember thinking that it looked like blood but just didn't really believe it could be. I bicycled straight home just in case and told my mom and her friend that either the man down the block was bleeding or maybe, more likely in my mind, covered in ketchup. My mom's friend looked over the fence and said, "My God, it is blood." My mom called an ambulance but later that night she told me he died at the hospital because he had a disorder that didn't allow his blood to clot. It turned out he had been stabbed multiple times by another resident. My mom didn't use the word murder and we didn't have a TV so it wasn't a concept I really got. Our cat had kittens that same night and I remember my mom talking about a balance of new lives being born versus people dying. I remember it being just interesting to me as a kid, but as an adult it seems pretty terrifying. I would be a lot more disturbed if I saw something like that now with a more full understanding of mortality and homicide. Back when I was between 4 to 6 I used to live in a foster home with my older autistic sister, 6 to 8, due to my mom's drug use. There I was frequently abused both emotionally and physically. I had my own room, But I only went in it when child services came over, or when my foster parents or their own kids wanted to have company. The rest of my time was spent on the toilet, in the basement. I slept, pooped and ate there for weeks at a time whilst being rarely fed, and after months of this I had an incident completely uncharacteristic of me. It was after my foster mother at the time gave me my plate of food and finished her barrage of screaming. Before uttering her last word she, with one quick motion, turned off the light and slammed the door shut. I was utterly terrified. Quickly I began to scan my hands along the walls, pants still around my ankles, in a pathetic attempt to find the switch in the darkness, yet to no avail. I couldn't find it. What was minutes of this felt like hours to me at the time. It was only until after my adopted mother came in and turned on the light to laugh at my girly reaction, as she came to put it later, that she and I noticed poop smeared all over the floor, wall, and ceiling. For a good number of years after that I convinced myself there was no way I did that. How would I have even gotten it on the ceiling? I would ask myself. It wasn't until just a year ago, when my brain all but suppressed the aforementioned memory, that I saw a Philip DeFranco video hit the front page, about a YouTube family who abused their kids for ad revenue. One kid in particular named Cody got the brunt of it. At one point their videos go on to say that Cody wasn't allowed to go to Disneyland with them recently, due to the fact that he smeared poop all over the bathroom walls. This is when Philip DeFranco interjects, stating that abused kids will do that in fits of rage or trance-like states in order to subconsciously gain control over an aspect of their life. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was the one who smeared poop all over their bathroom, and it's a sign I was considerably abused, a lot worse than my brain will allow me to remember at this point in my life, probably for the better. When I was about 6, my dad began having an affair with a much younger woman. She ended up moving pretty close by us after breaking up with her boyfriend. Anyway, cut to Halloween and we go around my very small neighborhood to trick or treat. After we finish up, my dad decides to take me to more houses. We end up driving to his girl's house. She gave me a full-size Snickers and then she disappeared with my dad for a while. I still remember the blue light flickering from the TV as I sat alone in her living room. I never said anything to my mom until much later. I kind of knew what was going on and didn't want to hurt her. My dad has been married to this girl for almost 20 years now. She's my stepmom. My mom was 6 months pregnant when this was all happening. I had a friend when I was about 5 who always wore what I thought were really bright socks on her arms. I thought they were rad. I remember being confused that she called her parents by their names instead of mom and dad. I found out much later that it was because they were her foster parents after her real father had held her in a bathtub of boiling water. Her rad socks were actually bandages that her foster parents tried to make a little more fun. I hope she's okay now.